All right, we are back. Now, we've gone over ad nauseum, you probably think, the central nervous system, brain, spinal cord, the structures, the general functions. And once again, I know this is a huge chapter. I'm really going to try to focus on the major things, but this is just a lot of information that you need to know the basics about. So let's move right into the peripheral nervous system. So this will be anything that comes out of the base of the brain or the spinal cord going to the face, neck, torso, arms, and legs. So these are bundles of nerve fibers. The structure of that, don't worry about that, okay? Because we could actually get into the structure of the nerve itself. But anyway, you understand it's going to transport information to and from the central nervous system. It'll include spinal and cranial nerves. So we're going to go over spinal and cranial nerves. Cranial nerves will come out of the base of the brain and the brainstem, a little tiny bit off the spinal cord. There's 12 pairs. I have mnemonics. I have the basic functions that I'm going to teach you. It's going to provide the motor and sensory of the neck and head and parasympathetic to the torso as the vagus nerve. There's 31 pairs of spinal nerves. There's 8 cervical, which is a little weird, right? Because there's 7 cervical vertebrae, and it's because they start above. Don't let this blow your mind. If you want to know this, listen. If you don't, just know there's 8 cervical spinal nerves. How they count them begins above C1 and ends below C7 at the 8th spinal nerve of the cervical spine. So if you want to know, there you are. 12 thoracic, which matches the amount of thoracic vertebra. 5 lumbar, which matches the same vertebra. 5 sacral, there's actually 5 few segments of the sacrum. And there's 1 coccygeal nerve. Now, all of these spinal nerves are mixed nerves, which I showed you previously, which are sensory and motor. They're going to provide sensory and motor to the torso and the extremities. Okay, so sensory nerves or afferent nerves carry impulses to the brain. Motor nerves or efferent nerves carry impulses away from the brain or to the body. And there's this silly little mnemonic, Dossip and Vomoa. And what this does is this shows you sensory and motor. You're like, what are you talking about? So Dossip and Vomoa is the mnemonic. What it means is sensory comes from the dorsal of the cord, which is also known as, can you guess it? This is why I didn't put it in, posterior. Sensory, guys, is incoming or outgoing information. Incoming. And incoming information in the sensory system is afferent. It's just what they call it. So the mnemonic for sensory information coming into the cord is Dossip. It's dorsal, afferent, sensory, incoming, posterior of the cord. The opposite of motor, is motor. It would be on the ventral part of the cord. Outgoing information is efferent, which is motor, which is outgoing, which is anterior. Okay, so it's a silly mnemonic, but it helps you to remember those informations quickly and easily. Now, as a sidebar, from each spinal nerve, so C1, C2, C3, C4, C5, C6, C7, C8, C1 through 12, L1 through 5, S1 through 5, C1 for coccygeal, okay? Each one of those go to an area of the skin known as a dermatome. That's why you can test areas of the skin to see if there's damage to a specific nerve root, because if there is damage to a specific nerve root, it could denote that there's been a herniation there. Okay, and I have a picture of those dermatomes. So you can just I use the opposite end of my reflex hammer to test them, and it would just be a really easy, quick screen, and you would test one side to the next with dermatomes to see if somebody's had a herniation, and if they have, then they would feel it differently from side to side. Okay, so dermatome. So the area of a skin innervated by a specific nerve root. Okay, so let's look at a little section of this spinal cord. Okay, so they pulled out a little section of this spinal cord, and this is anterior, and this is posterior. Okay, sensory will come through this dorsal root ganglion, and a ganglion is just a collection of cell bodies. Okay, so what happens here is the sensory axon comes up. The cell body for the sensory axon is in this dorsal root ganglion, and then it will send information. So it'd actually be a dendrite bringing information in. I gotta write the book about this. Okay, so you have a dendrite coming up to the cell body, and then an axon sending information into the cord. At that point, it has a multitude of things it can do. If it's a reflex, it'll send the information right back out to this motor neuron. Okay, most likely it's going to send sensory information up to the brain. Okay, at some point it'll cross over. So let's just think of it that way. So this sensory nerve will send information to the cord, it'll send it up to the brain. On the front part of the cord, we have motor coming down. Motor will go through this ventral root or anterior root and out onto this mixed spinal nerve. Okay, and once again, this spinal nerve will have sensory and motor. Okay, and that's the general gist of how these are set up. The area where you have just sensory or just motor is very short. They make it look huge. It's right near the cord. And so, don't think of it as being this huge long nerve. It's pretty short. It's just a few centimeters right near the cord, and then it'll turn into that mixed spinal nerve. Here's a picture of the dermatomes, and you can see, and you'll go over this in ortho-neuro because we have so much more to cover. I'm not going to go through it, but suppose you think that there's damage to L5, okay? And L5 actually is going to be right in this region. You would just take a pin, or most neurologists actually use a straight little safety pin, and you would test this and say, does this little pinprick feel same as this little pinprick from side to side? And if they've blown a huge disc at L5 and it's compressing L5, they're not going to feel it as much on this side. So you can test dermatomes throughout the upper extremity, lower extremity, torso, anywhere on the body, but they're specific as to their distribution. You can see the distribution of C1 through 5 through the upper extremity, as well as, all the way up to C8. Thoracic will be on the chest. Lumbar and sacral you could test in the legs. Okay, so you'll learn that in ortho-neuro where those specific dermatomes are. But I'll give you a little jump start and tell you what they are so you understand what they are, and it will correlate to specific nerve roots. It is a question time. So for both the brain and spinal cord, motor comes from the front and sensory goes into the back. True or false? Pause it if you need to. Otherwise, we are going to move on. Okay, so peripheral nervous system. What I want you to understand is those nerve roots that we spoke about. So we have C1 through 8, T1 through 12, L1 through 5, S1, 2, 3, 4, can all come off the cord. They come off the cord and they form what are called plexuses. Okay, there's a cervical, a brachial, and then a lumbosacral. Most people link them together. And what that plexus does is it takes the nerve roots and mixes them up. So when we're talking about motor control, this is different to, compared to dermatomes. Dermatomes are just according, to specific nerve root levels, such as C1 or just C2. With the plexuses, we actually mix up the nerve roots into this plexus, which then will form specific nerves, which will go out to the extremities. And the reason we do that is because we don't want to use just one nerve root. If we damage it, we would lose motor control to that muscle. Okay, so plexuses will actually be put into place so we mix up the nerve roots so we have a combination so that way if there's damage to one nerve root, we have a backup plan with the other nerve roots. So know that there's a brachial which goes to the upper extremity and lumbosacral, which will go to the pelvic basin and the lower extremities. Those plexuses then branch into peripheral nerves. Okay, so here's the brachial plexus, and you can see how it'll take the nerve roots. So you have roots, C1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This actually, with the brachial plexus, will have C4 through T1. Those come down and form trunks, divisions, then cords. Well, you don't need to know that. But then it'll form specific nerves, okay? Radial nerve will go down the back of the arm. Median and ulnar will go to the front of the arm. Median goes towards the thumb. Ulnar goes towards the pinky. I think those three peripheral nerves you should know, okay? So radial, if you need to pause the tape, write this down. Radial will go to the back of the arm. Median actually will go to the thumb and the index finger because the median nerve is what's compressed with carpal tunnel. Ulnar goes to the pinky. That can also get compressed at the elbow. Okay, so write those things down. I'll repeat them one more time. Radial goes down to the entire back of the arm. Median goes to the thumb and the index finger. Ulnar will be middle finger out to pinky. And that also goes behind the elbow. It can get compressed on the elbow. And that's actually your funny nerve. Did you know that? When you think you hit your funny bone, that's actually an ulnar nerve. If you take your finger and you push in there, you'll feel it zing down to your pinky. Okay, so know those three peripheral nerves. The other peripheral nerve that you should know is sciatic nerve. It goes down the entire back of the leg. It tends to get damaged quite frequently. It comes off that lumbosacral plexus. Okay, so no sciatic nerve. Going off-road in there a little bit. Okay, so sciatic nerve goes down the entire back of the leg. Are there more peripheral nerves? Absolutely. But those will be some major nerves that you should know. All right, so cranial nerves, everybody's bane of their existence. These will provide motor and function to the head and neck. There's 12 pairs. They're bilateral, which means they go to right and left. Some are sensory, some are motor, some has both. I have a mnemonic, don't worry. Each nerve travels from the brain through an opening, which is called the foramen, to its destination. We're not going to go through the foramen. We just don't have time with all the information that we have. If you ever want to watch, I have my neuro tapes. I'll send a copy to you. Okay, so here's your chart. This is a very simple chart. You should know this chart. I know this looks like a lot, but believe it or not, there's so much more that you should know. So you're going to have to take some notes on this, but I'll try to keep it really simple. So the names of the cranial nerves. You should know the Roman numerals. I know they're not teaching them in school anymore. You should know them. You might work for a neurologist who probably reference them, or write them down as the Roman numerals. The name: olfactory, optic, oculomotor, trochlear, trigeminal, abducens, facial, vestibular, cochlear, glossopharyngeal, vagus, accessory, hypoglossal. I did it with one breath. So can you. So practice these names, but I don't like laundry lists. So I would like you to learn it with their function. Okay, so if you start to learn these, some of these make sense, and some of these you can group together. For example, olfactory is smell, pretty easy. Optic is vision, easy. Ocular, motor, trochlear, and abducens, guys, the three of those together move the eye. When we get into sensory, I'll tell you how they specifically move the eye. Okay, so memorize those together as movement of the eye. Now, trigeminal gives you the sensation from the entire face, but it is also motor for mastication, which simply is chewing. Facial, don't get confused. Some people think facial is sensation. It is not sensation of the face. It is motor control of the face, and it gives us taste to the anterior part of the tongue. So trigeminal and facial, you don't study together, but they're almost opposite each other, right? Trigeminal makes your mouth chew. Facial makes your mouth taste. Facial makes your face move, trigeminal makes your face sensation. Okay, so even though you're not studying them together, they're almost opposite each other. Vestibular cochlear is hearing and balance, and it's right in the name. The vestibular part of the ear is what helps us with our balance. The cochlear part is what helps us with the sensation of hearing. Glossopharyngeal and vagus both help with the gag reflex. Okay, so you can lump those together. Glossopharyngeal is taste to the posterior tongue. Do you need to know it? You sure do. Okay, because if you test somebody who has had head trauma, they could have damage to the taste of different parts of their tongue. Now, vagus is also known as the wanderer, vagus or vagabond. This is the only nerve that goes beyond the head and neck. It goes down to the entire torso and provides parasympathetic innervation to the entire torso. Heart, GI, anything that gets parasympathetic innervation in the torso is from the vagus. And I always remember that as a vagabond, okay? Accessory used to be known as spinal accessory. It helps me to remember because I think of it as coming off the spinal cord and going to the upper traps and causing a shoulder shrug. Okay, so accessory, if you lift your shoulders up like I don't know what's going on, that's accessory. Hypoglossal helps with swallowing, speech, and movement of the tongue. I would add movement of the tongue there. Okay, it's kind of inherent in speech, but I would know that. So it's really not that bad. I think some of their names, hypoglossal, glossal is tongue, under the tongue. Glossopharyngeal is to the back of the throat, pharynx, right? Try to somehow get connections with these words. All right. Now, the way to study these is you've got the general functions, get the mnemonic down for the beginning letter of each name. So the one that I do, and I'll say this twice, is ooh, 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 and this is not dirty. There's a lot of dirty ones out there. You could look them up if you want. To touch and feel very good vegetables and honey. Okay? That's my mnemonic. Ooh, 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 to touch and feel very good vegetables and honey. Whenever you get any cranial nerve question, brain dump, do your mnemonic. There's other ones out there. This is the one that I use. I put the first letter and then you go through. Olfactory is always your first. Optic is your second. Ocular motor is your third. That's how you get them, in order. Trochlear, somehow you're going to have to remember trochlear before trigeminal, then abducens, etc. Okay, so that's your mnemonic. For the sensory type, here's your mnemonic. Some say money matters, but my brother says big business means more. Again, some say money matters, but my brother says big business means more. Once again, you have a question, you come in your brain dump. All right? Honestly, when you're out doing clinicals, you're not going to need to remember if they're just sensory or just motor or both. You're going to test them in orthoneuro, and you'll know if somebody's not smelling. You'll know if somebody's not seeing. You'll know if their eyes aren't moving. But you need to know it just for the exams, okay? That's your cranial nerves. You'll need to know Roman numerals, the names, the sensory, and this very basic function, okay? Now, as far as location, I won't get too crazy asking you about location, but I wanted to put them down for you, and it's actually pretty simple. And I always go just by numbers. 1 is at the front, 12 is at the very end, okay? So it goes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 comes out of the pons. That's always my middle point marker. And then it goes 6, 7, and 8 are bundled in there together. And then it just goes down the brainstem. 9, 10, 11, and then it jumps back up to the front of the medulla for 12. I'm not going to ask you. If you want to know these, you feel free to review it again a couple of times, but I just want to point, it pretty much goes from the frontal lobe, and we're on the underside of the brain. I should have clarified looking at the brainstem. It goes from the frontal lobe down. Okay, now this is a good picture to look at though for the pons. You could see the pons looks like, I thought I had my drawing tool on. That big fat belly of the pons and the medulla oblongata thinning out to the brainstem. Okay. I won't ask you about location, but there it is should you want to know it. All right, autonomic nervous system. So I'm taking something that I teach over a week or two and I'm putting it in 2 slides. So autonomic nervous system is an unconscious response that will either stimulate or calm our nervous system. So the 2 major subdivisions are sympathetic and parasympathetic. Okay. Sympathetic is for our fight or flight responses, and it stimulates things that create E responses: excitement, embarrassment, exercise. Parasympathetic nervous system is responsible for rest and digest. It stimulates what are known as cholinergic receptors. So, and I've skipped over adrenergic receptors. So adrenergic receptors are going to be the use of norepinephrine as a neurotransmitter. Cholinergic uses acetylcholine. You might get into that when you get into pharmacology. I'm just going to go over that very briefly. Okay, so parasympathetic releases acetylcholine. I can type that on there for you. Okay, and adrenergic will be norepinephrine. Okay, receptors. And you'll get more into that when you get into pharmacology. All right, so these are your parasympathetic responses, all D responses. So digestion, I'll move that up a little bit for you. Diuresis, defecation. Parasympathetic is your resting and your resting and regenerating part of your nervous system. You can't constantly be in sympathetic facilitation. You can't constantly be a slug on the couch. You need to have a balance of both. So these work with and against each other according to what activities we're performing at that moment. Looking at a picture of them. So they all have 2 nerves which comprise their pathways. That gets a little complicated, so I'm just going to keep it basic. So to the right, we have parasympathetic. I want to point out the nerves that create the parasympathetic responses come from the cranium and the sacrum. Okay, so that is called craniosacral. So parasympathetic is craniosacral. If someone's having some sort of abnormal parasympathetic responses, there's damage either to the cranial nerves or the sacral nerves that lead to those parasympathetic nerves. Sympathetic is going to be thoracolumbar. And you can see they're going to come out of the thoracic and upper lumbar regions. So if somebody has some sort of abnormal sympathetic response, the damage to the nerves will happen at the thoracic or the lumbar region. Okay. All right. Let's do a quick question time. What part of the nervous system is stimulated during digestion? A, parasympathetic, B, sympathetic, C, vagus, 2 of the above. What do you think? Go ahead and answer. And at this point, I'm going to pause the tape and then move into the next group of notes. We're actually moving into dysfunctions. So if you have any questions about the anatomy or the physiology, feel free to shoot me an email. I'd be happy to get back to you. Thank you so much. See you in the next video.